We're about to read you an excerpt or extract from the book Kid Normal, which is written by us too.
It's like the bedtime story, isn't it? Can I be Tom Hardy?
In your dreams, mate.
Okay.
In my dreams.
So this is a part of the book where Murph has just arrived at his new school, and he's beginning to suspect that the school is a little bit different to your normal school.
Not everything's as it seems.
40 minutes into Mr. Flash's lesson, Murph sat at the back of the class, feeling as though his brain had been removed, played with by a kitten for 10 minutes, and then gently replaced. He sat with his mouth open and his brow furrowed like a small, ploughed face field, trying desperately to work out what was going on. At his previous schools, lessons had had names like literacy, maths, or PE. Mr. Flash's lesson was called CT. But for the life of him, Murph couldn't work out what that stood for. At first he went through the obvious options like computer technology, but there were no computers involved. Then, as things got odder, he wildly thought that it could stand for anything. Cheese toppling, cat tickling, clown trolling. As far as Murph could work out, it seemed to be some sort of bizarre role-playing exercise, and he could only assume he'd missed something vital in the first few weeks of term. But he'd missed school before and usually had no problems catching up with the odd times table or creative writing assessment about what he'd done over Easter. This lesson made him feel like he'd been to space for Easter and landed on a totally different planet. It started off with a boy with red hair and cheeks standing up in front of the class and striking a pose with his hands on his hips. Mr. Flash looked at him approvingly. Clearly this guy was a star student.
Right, Timothy,
Beamed Mr. Flash.
let's see how you're progressing, shall we?
Timothy began to strain as if he was trying very hard but failing to go to the toilet. Beads of sweat broke out on his oversized forehead, his ruddy cheeks becoming maroon. Mr. Flash gestured towards an old-fashioned grey TV set that was standing in the corner of the room.
Concentrate now, Timothy.
He growled.
Focus on the impact point.
Impact point, Murph mouthed, turning to Mary and giving her a quizzical stare. He'd expected her to look as baffled as him, but instead she gave him another cool raise of those eyebrows and a jerk of her head in the direction of Timothy. But before Murph could turn back, there was a loud fizzing noise and a sharp flash of light. When he did look forward, there was a thin stream of smoke rising from the back of the old TV, and Timothy, who was now almost entirely beetroot-coloured, was looking rather pleased with himself.
Well, it's a start.
Said Mr. Flash.
Well done. But please do continue to use the remote when you're at home for the time being. We don't want another letter from your parents, do we?
Some of Timothy's friends in the front row giggled at this, and one of them cuffed him on the shoulder as he sat down, as if to say, "Nice one." Murph wondered what he'd just missed. Clearly the red-faced boy had done something to the TV, but how and what? And why wasn't he in trouble? Murph had once hit a TV at his old school with a badly aimed plimsoll that he'd been trying to throw to a friend, and he didn't get a well done. In fact, he'd had to go around and polish all the other TVs to say sorry. But there was no time to ponder this further. Mr. Flash was ordering someone else to the front of the class. It was the girl who'd been sitting on the other side of Mary. She had long, dark hair with green ends that straggled over her face. Her jumper was baggy and her jeans were ripped. Mr. Flash didn't look quite as enthusiastic this time.
Right. Morning, Nellie,
He said in a resigned tone of voice. Nellie didn't speak. She stood at the front of the class, staring at the ground and shuffling her dirty white sneakers.
Tell us about your cape then, Nellie.
Coaxed Mr. Flash. She's not wearing a cape, thought Murph. Actually, Nellie was dressed like all her usual clothes were in the wash. She didn't respond to Mr. Flash's question. Murph thought he heard her let out a small squeak, but it was hard to tell because at that moment there was a rumble of thunder from outside. A sudden gust of wind opened one of the windows and sent a pile of paper flying. Mr. Flash marched over and slammed the window closed.
Very nice, Nellie. Thank you.
He said. She gets thanked for looking at her toes and not saying anything. This was even weirder than that time at Murph's previous school when Gavin Honeybun had brought in his mum's old mop for show and tell and pretended it was a horse.
Great cape from Timothy this morning, I think you'll all agree.
Mr. Flash was saying.
And progressing very nicely indeed. Nellie? Well, she gave it a try, didn't she? Now, what about hearing from the newest member of the class? Murph, is it?
Murph shuddered into action like an old tractor. His legs lifted him into an upright position, even though he didn't recall asking them to extend. Before he knew what was going on, he was facing the class, who were looking at him expectantly. Everyone except Nellie, who was still staring at the floor.
Now, mind the fans,
cautioned Mr. Flash, pointing up to the ceiling where a couple of plastic fans were rotating slowly.
We don't want sliced boy, do we?
He winked at Murph. Murph stared back at him blankly. Mr. Flash might as well have been speaking French. A horrible suspicion was growing at the back of Murph's mind like unwanted mushrooms. a suspicion that he was very much at the wrong school.